Alright, today I'm going to broach a video. It's about a very specific, strange topic that most gamers don't know about. That's okay. I don't think anybody's ever tried to codify this one before, so I'm going to give it a try. How games really work is it's kind of like, if you've seen that meme of the iceberg, where at the top of the iceberg you have like the sky and the ocean, and then you have the iceberg in the ocean, and then further down in the depths you go, the more esoteric and strange the topics around that subject matter turn out, right? Most people just go with what they know. They go with what's available. If it's something they can see and it's easy to come across, that's what they want. It's what you get with corporate gaming. After all, commercialized gaming is made by a business so that you can buy their games and play their games, and they're easily available. Everybody has access to them. They're available in most stores. Board games are the most commercial I've seen. The least commercial I've seen tend to be role-playing games, but that's not always so. Generally speaking, if a division of Hasbro, a division of Asmodee, or if Games Workshop makes your game, it's probably a commercial game. One of my favorite games is technically under the corporate commercial model, even though they're a smaller company. Next on the list, these smaller companies, yes, they're making money. Yes, they're producing a game, but they're not quite at the corporate level where it's all about they must produce a product. The way their game runs is different. They're usually not widely advertised, but they do advertise. They usually have people who are already interested in the kind of game they make, find out about these games, and then gather together with their friends in their own time and play these games. Small companies include things like Artal Games, Chaosium, even though Call of Cthulhu is very popular, and Plastic Soldier. You could say that Osprey Games, even though they're a giant in the book publishing industry, they are really new at wargaming. And so Osprey Games would qualify as small company games. I would even say that Catalyst Game Labs is a small company, even though Battletech is extremely popular right now, and even though they technically do kind of run on a corporate model to some degree, they really do act like a small company, especially when you look at stuff like Leviathans and Eclipse Phase. Those games don't run on the same model everything else does. Which brings up the next tier. You heard about this one before, indie games. Well, indie games are indie games. They're usually things you don't hear about widely. They're run by usually individuals or some person and their small group of friends just creates content. Usually it's got lower production value, but that's not as common nowadays. You see this kind of stuff come up on Kickstarter, but to be perfectly honest, Kickstarter supports these two models. This model, if it's going to show up on a Kickstarter, the indie game is probably going to swell up, get money, and die, because Kickstarter leaves a bad taste in people's mouths. Indie games don't really need an explanation. They're just so small key that you have to really belong to the cult cell that follows these indie games. The thing that makes indie games different from the next step down is these tend to be more widely available. Someone in Michigan may play games of Mustangs and Messerschmitts. Someone in Colorado may play games of Mustangs and Messerschmitts. You don't have to be on site with the game creators to play the game. That's where this comes in. Now, we've all been through this, or I've especially been through this. Homebrew games. By homebrew, I mean they make up their own system and usually their own setting, which is more commonly found. A homebrew setting or a homebrew campaign is someone's own campaign run using a standard engine from one of these kind of things. But a homebrew game usually is when someone makes their own rule system. They also make their own terrain and miniatures for it, and you play it with that person in their little area. And they may have a group of friends or two that play their homebrew game. This is down to the brass tacks tactical level. People who play homebrew games play it with their friends, and only they and their friends know about that homebrew game. I've been through quite a few of them, and honestly speaking, I like the flavor of homebrew games. Even though indie games and small company games fuel the Dead Games channel, homebrew games really have the most cozy feel. The point of this video is the farthest step down. Most gamers wouldn't even think this kind of stuff exists, and you might have played something like this off the cuff, but the thing I'm talking about has a lot more self-generation to it than just a game of imagination or a random throw-together with miniatures and dice. Although, that's pretty close to the mark here. What we have is the speculative game. What is a speculative game? Well, you have someone who has usually a field of knowledge, an understanding of math and statistics, and they have other friends who have similar understanding of math and statistics and similar fields of knowledge. Or you have people who have interest and intelligence. Because the primary thing about speculative games, there is no established system. And the game does not exist after the speculative game is done. I'm going to talk about how speculative games actually work and what they are like, but speculative games have these two things that just make them impossible to track, and most people don't know they exist. There is no game system. You just use math and dice. And secondly, you have to have a body of players that have a knowledge about a specific field that allows you to play the speculative game. Let's talk about this weird phantom that barely exists in gaming. There's a bunch of different possible ways that a speculative game can actually be codified, but first of all, it usually starts with the fact that somebody has a topic they're into. Let's say someone's a marine biologist and like, you know what, I know a shit ton about like whales and ocean stuff. And maybe there's one person in the party who's like, hey, I know a few things about maritime stuff, kind of like, weather patterns or whatnot. Maybe they used to be like part of the merchant marine. That kind of thing. And you have someone else who's like, you know what? I just like the concept. I'm a friend of you guys. And this guy probably, I don't know, it'd be nice if they had a math degree, but not required. I'm guaranteeing if this guy and this guy are actual biologists and members of the merchant marine, slash retired, they probably have some math under their belt. Then there's an additional person showing up. You need to make an additional, there's the game master there. An additional player shows up and says, hey, I like sharks. Can we have sharks in this one? And if this person's like, okay, we will add sharks to that. This guy's like, fuck yeah, sharks, man. And so you have the making of a group where you've got 4 players who they want to play. This guy's thinking, hey, I want to just cook something up with like whales in the ocean and shit like that. And so it comes down to not just, coming together and saying, hey, I like this thing, I want to do an idea. There's no game system that really supports that. You could like bring GURPS into it or play it in D20 or some crap like that. But on a speculative game, we're thinking, you know what, we're not going to go dungeon smashing with a bunch of whales. What we're going to do is we're going to do stuff like possible economy, like weird cult stuff going on. What would culture affect with the whales? And probably there might be a whale and shark war that is the final chapter that this speculative game actually circles around. So these guys just has a bunch of books and information on, marine biology in general. They want to have a fun little game together, and so these 4 people decide to gather in the halls of our astute game master and Poseidon's bro over there. And they decide to run a game where they don't have a system that can stand for it. They'll make something up. They've got dice in their collection. They can go out and buy a set of platonic solids and just go to town from that. But generally speaking, this is how it happens. Now, they can take this game and produce it. It can be their homebrew game. They can take this game, make it into an indie game, or sell it to a company. But if it's a speculative game, these guys just have an idea where they're like, you know what, let's do this stuff. And they get together and do it. And so let's say they have, let me roll a dice here actually. They have 4 different sessions they play of this game. And during that session, the whales actually develop some bizarre magic shit and blast the sharks to oblivion or some crap like that. Or maybe magic's not even involved. We just have, whales versus sharks. Or maybe the whales actually think of a technology somehow. They don't have none of these guys have opposable fins, So how do you even do this stuff? Octopuses could step in and become the arms builders for each side. It's like octopi are now mercenaries that make cool shit for you. Who knows? This is what speculative gaming is all about. Idea comes up, the guys play it, 4 sessions worth. And so for 1 month in 2019, all of these weekends turn into the instance in which this game happens. Everybody has memories of it. There might be notes owned by our whale master up there. Everybody, they had their fun playing the game. But no one knows about it afterwards. They can talk about it, and they'll say, hey, remember the shark war? Yeah. This kind of thing can happen. It does happen. I have been involved in 2 of them. The first was a bunch of retired military people who, when they heard about the attack on 9/11, I was a friend of theirs, and I had information that I had pulled from a place called strategypage.com. Mixing this together, the idea came up, well, let us predict what conflict in Afghanistan may turn out to be like. And of course, it expanded from there. People are thinking, well, what are the other players involved? And so we actually had a speculative system where we pretty much just dragged in reference books and played a very interesting game. The second one was an air combat-based speculative war game. And that one was really interesting because a lot of the things were just fed into a computer and then we spat it back into a tabletop style arrangement. The one thing that really is the game book you need for a speculative war game, or a speculative game in general, is nonfiction reference books. Now for a quick run through of what you usually would need, or just a general sampling of what I really mean by, source books. Let's say you want to play a modern war game of some kind, where it's some kind of modern what-if conflict. Well, knowing about the information is a good idea. I have this book that was originally published in '85 and years previous by, of all things, the Department of Defense, and it's just a basic report to various different, political offices about Soviet military power. It was available for sale. These are actually relatively common to find, but if you open it up, it's got information about all kinds of different things that the Soviet military forces were planning on during the Cold War. Having an actual, this is a book by Ian Hogue. Military Small Arms has been around for a little bit. There's multiple editions of it, and they have detailed information on various different subtypes of weapons. This actually beats a lot of the gun guides you might get for like D20 Modern or something like Twilight 2000. They often have a really simplified set of the rules. If you wanted to get more complex with your guns, having knowledge and information like this is a great idea. And so this would also help out. It's not all about guns, though. I bought this a while back because of pure laughter. It's called a Special Forces Guide. It's got stuff in there like boots and ranger vests, Jeeps and various different cars. I mean, they even have stuff in here like just normal boats and stuff. Of course, they have like the good hardware that people talk about. This is very similar, you might say, to this book, except for it has like a little bit of everything. So if you wanted a more Special Forces or James Bond style campaign, you've got all kinds of stuff just in a Special Forces Recognition Guide. So there's that. I did do a game on air combat. One of the easiest things to find as far as references for air combat is something like this. It's a thick volume. They make plenty of these. They used to be made by things like Exeter Press or Salamander, and this one is a Barnes & Noble copy. This is actually one of the older ones. I bought this one in 2001, and it's got detailed information on lots of different planes. Well, not super detailed. I mean, it gives you this. There's a series called Jane's All the World Aircraft. They've always been priced out of my ability to buy because most of them cost like $200 or $300 to buy a copy. I should probably save up and get a Jane's book. But this kind of book is very good to have as a reference material. They also make things that are, if you want, like what if, they have plenty of experimental aircraft books and what if situations. This book from the Salamander, yes, very nice guide. A lot of the planes in here don't exist. They're not real. They were just concepts during like the 70s and 80s. Some of them are real, like the AMX did go into service with Brazil and Italy. And then, of course, you have things like the 20 Tiger Shark didn't. The MiG-29, that's a very old school drawing of it. But yeah, the MiG-29 is present in this book. Very common aircraft nowadays, but back then it was a future fighter. It's hard to find something where it's very useful for your entire campaign. This book, Modern Air Combat, Bill Gunston, what can I say? It goes through like the basics of how jet combat and modern jet fighters actually work. It talks about things like approach vectors and how ECW systems would be set up, cockpit layouts. Then it has a section that you would expect on like aircraft themselves. Listen to that spine breaking. Ouch. And then of course it talks about tactics and mission priorities. Having something that's that in depth as far as a reference for a campaign is indispensable. And it's hard to find stuff like that. Usually you'd have an expert on hand that knows about stuff like that as opposed to having a book. But now I have a book that covers for my lack of hands-on expertise. So that's my little quip on speculative games. They don't exist. They really don't. Unless you have paperwork from the days when you were running a speculative game in a file somewhere, they don't exist. I don't, for example. I don't have any speculative game paperwork because someone else was running the game. I was just a participant. You'll probably never run one. You'll probably never be in one. But it's a cool idea, and I want to make sure that people know, yeah, take your brain, take some dice, and do some actual statistics. 3 dice that are really beloved of speculative gamers. The D20. Guy Gax was really good into the D20 because it represents 5% increments on a 20-sided dice. The D10, it's pretty much basic 10 through, 90% chances of doing things. And then, of course, percentile dice. Those are really common for speculative games because you can then match real-world statistics against your numbers you actually roll. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you're a bit boggled, don't worry. There's a bunch of different types of games out there. Most games, commercial games aren't necessarily bad. I prefer these kind of games, or these kind of games, really. But if you have a topic you want to just play with your friends about, and you've got brains, and you have the ability to talk and discuss things among each other, you may want to try a speculative game one day. You may not want to spend the time producing it, but you may want to play it. And speculative games would be the best opportunity for that. Thanks for watching. Have a great Halloween.